On this show, I bring on a past client where we talk about how he's grown his agency. And he has a great book called Leveling Up and going through the stages, and talks about how esports, and we talk about sports, of how you can use this in order to really grow your agency. We talk about Clubhouse, all kinds of stuff. It's a really cool episode. We jump all around and we talk about a $75,000 Pokemon card. Crazy stuff. So you're going to love this episode. Let's get into it. Hey, Eric, welcome to the show.
Good to see you, Jason. It's been a while.
Yeah, man, it's been a while since we worked together. So tell us, for the people that haven't heard of you, tell us who you are and what do you do?
Yeah, thanks. So my name's Eric Siu. I help level up the world through marketing. I have a couple marketing businesses. I have a agency called Single Grain, software company called ClickFlow, and then we've got a whole marketing education stuff with marketing school and the events tied to it. So there's a bunch of stuff, and I also invest in different MarTech SaaS companies, which is my background. And then other than that, I have a podcast called Leveling Up. Have a book called Leveling Up right here coming out, and then have a podcast called Marketing School, and that's basically it.
Very cool. And so how'd you get started in all this? You have it's not, you haven't been in the agency world too long. And so how did you kind of jump into it?
Yeah, so it's pretty unconventional. The agency that I took over, and you know the story already. I bought the company for $2 out of pocket because it was a failing SEO agency at the time, because the Google algorithm updates basically made the business model invalid overnight. And I was brought in as a number two to help save the company, because I previously had helped turn another company around, which is a startup. And so this was a different challenge, different service. Like, the plane's going down, right? Like, can you put the plane back together while flying it? I was like, okay, this will be an interesting challenge. About 6 months into it, the four other co-founders said they wanted out. And Neil Patel, who's my podcast co-host, he was like, hey, Eric, you should get out as a friend. There's no brand equity. There's nothing here. And I was like, okay, why don't we do this? I'll give it a shot. I'll pay $1 for 10% of your shares and another dollar for another 10% of another partner's shares. The rest through the, profits of the company, with contingency that the company failed, I'd own nothing. So asymmetric bet, I'd have unlimited upside with, my downside would be, it's basically an MBA, right? And so fortunately it worked out, but I almost lost everything. I'm happy to go in that direction, but that's how I got started. First year, had no idea what I was doing, dropped all the way down to one employee.
And so, a lot of people are listening. They're like, okay, so what was the thing? What was the point where you almost lost everything? Let's go into that story a little bit.
Yeah. So, 2000, what was it, 13 or so, something like that. New year, I'm like, okay, look at me. I'm the CEO now. I own 100% of the company. Look at me. And then I end up reading this book called Let My People Go Surfing, from the Patagonia co-founder. And I was like, yeah, let my people go surfing. Nobody wants to be micromanaged, whatever. Stop showing up to the office. And so I'm like, I hired some senior people. I'm like, yeah, let them do their thing. Whole thing implodes. And then I have people calling me saying, people are showing up to the office and, like, just wearing like almost like pajamas and eating like chips while watching Family Guy. Whole thing is just blowing up in front of me. And then my outside accounting firm calls me, and they're just like, hey, it might be time to shut it down. Basically, I made it went from bad to worse just because I didn't build rapport with anybody. I let them do their thing. I had no vision. I had no sense of what culture meant. And the whole thing just fell apart. And I almost took another job. So I was at a crossroads. I had said yes. And then I basically, the next day I was like, I can't do it. And I continued on with Single Grain.
And so, all right, so that's the all-time low, and
Yeah.
your accounting firm says, let's throw in the towel, Eric. What did you do to turn it around?
Yeah. When I first started at Single Grain, because my background's in SEO, we were getting about 4,000 visits a month, which is okay for a blog. I had started to focus on a lot of guest blog posting, a lot of, building more relationships, and we started publishing a lot more content. We had good domain authority on our website, which is just how strong our website is. And for throughout that first year, it started to increase rapidly. So, it went from about 4,000 to about 50,000 visits a month. And then we got that number one ranking for the agency keyword that about, digital marketing agency, right? I have nothing to hide. And so that's how we started getting all these leads. And unfortunately, I couldn't fulfill the leads anymore. So what we started to do was we started to refer the leads out, and I would take 25 to 30% commission for the lifetime of the customer. That kept us afloat. And then I realized that these other agencies they couldn't retain the client. And so from that point on, I was like, okay, let's take on some contractors. We have some more money to play with. We took on some contractors. And then, from there, we're like, okay, the contractors are good, but they're mercenaries. They're not fully embedded with the culture. So then we started hiring full-time people. It really started to take off again once we hired that integrator. And I'm sure people have talked about it on this podcast, visionary integrator concept, rocket fuel. And that's when things started to blow up. And, my thesis has always been with the agency, if I were able to make it work, the services business is not super interesting to me, but the cash flows to be able to take that and go reinvest in more exponential or durable sources of income, that's more interesting. Unfortunately, that worked out. And then now, combined with everything, about 8 figures or over 8 figures. Yeah.
Yep. And so what's kind of the percentage that you would reinvest? And did that number go down over time? Like, in the very beginning, sometimes, you can, or did it go up over time? Everybody's probably listening or like, well, how much should I reinvest in the company, or should I
Yeah.
rape the company?
Yeah, that's a great question. I would put an asterisk by this because I come from a gambling background, so all in. If I'm betting on myself, best investment ever, right? Warren Buffett. I don't recommend this for everyone because your mileage may vary. You might have a mortgage, you might have a family to take care of. Who knows, right? There's a lot of other commitments. I was fortunate enough where I didn't have any of that to worry about at the time. So I continue to press every single year. I put everything back into the business. And I think it's fine to pay taxes, absolutely. But if you have a good sense of what you can do with the business and you can create more jobs from it, and you don't have a lot of other overhead to worry about, then, for me, I kept pressing. And so for me, it was 100%. And I didn't necessarily want to raise money because, I've seen that game before, right? And there's nothing wrong with that. In some cases, I might raise money for other stuff, and we have. But at the time, I just wanted to bootstrap my way up to prove that I could do it before, thinking about anything else.
So let's talk about, leveling up. Why did you write it?
Yeah, it's a good question. I remember on another podcast, this guy Anthony Pompliano was asking me, "Why are you doing a book? Nobody reads books." And I'm like, "Well, I read books." So I started writing this book, and I don't recommend this, while I was trying to save the agency. Stupid. And people are like, "Yeah, it's going to take you probably 5 to 6 years to do it." It took me 6 years, probably 7 drafts. I was like, "It probably will take me 2." It took me 7. Um, and so I come from an esports background. All I was really good at growing up was games. And, there's a stigma towards games, right? Parents always looked down on me, friends maybe didn't respect it. And then it's just like I wasn't seen. And now you see esports taking off, but you have 3 billion people in the world that have played games. And then they feel like they have a stigma, they feel unseen. But in sports, and I'm sure you've played sports, right? Just understanding that, look, sports fosters teamwork, communication, resilience, all that I got from games. And my point is, I just see, I think business is the ultimate game. Life is a game. And I wake up every day and it's the same feeling I've had growing up. It's fun, right? And I'm just going to keep playing until I die, which is why I have a fundamental kind of buy and hold model where I just want to go buy other businesses. And so that's what it is. I just, do this, have fun. I treat life as a game. There's level ups, right? In the book, I talk about, one of the chapters is thievery. If you think about Apple, Apple as an example, by the way, they stole this from Xerox. This mouse, they stole it from Xerox. Steve Jobs himself said, everything in life is a remix. And so if we think about it, Elon Musk, the rockets, they look fundamentally the same. You just add on the 10 to 20% that's unique. They come back to Earth. And so I think encouraging people that chapter talks about where I ethically learned to steal, right? And people there's cognitive dissonance there because we all like to think that we're original. And so the book is about, treating life as a game and going out throughout life and collecting power-ups. And from a business perspective, just understanding that there's levels to the game, right? So Jason, you as an example, you had the agency, you sold it, and you started doing the training, and then now you're back in the agency game, but you're buying other businesses, you're investing, and so you're consistently leveling up, and that's what it is. And you don't have to get to the next level, but if you want to get to it and you don't get to it, it's just because you didn't beat the current one.
Yeah, have you ever played the game Age of Empires?
I haven't, but I played a lot of StarCraft and Warcraft.
Okay. So there was a game in college that I would play with a bunch of my buddies where you kind of start off in the Stone Age and you have to acquire wood, gold, and I think food. And as
Yep.
you acquire so much, you actually start moving up to the next age, whether it be the middle, I don't know the different ages. I just know Stone Age, and then you go up. And then your weapons get better, your houses get better, your technology gets better. And that's kind of how I have always looked at, and that's, one of the reasons why we created the agency playbook and that framework of kind of like you're talking about. You're going, all right, once you get to the next level, you have to kind of reset a lot of, you know, the gold, the water, the food, and you have to kind of almost start over. Is that kind of what you're talking about with leveling up?
It's exactly that. So StarCraft, Command and Conquer, Warcraft, and I'm familiar with Age of Empires. It's a strategy game, right? What we're playing is it's a resource game, right? You decide how you want to use your resources, and you can go get more resources. And those that do the best job, they get the most, right? And that's not saying you need to get the most necessarily, but that's how you do it. That's how the game is played. So
That's right. What are some of the, so you talk about, is the first level kind of, I don't like to use steal. I like to kind of like, you know, re-energize it, like you were saying, you know, Apple wasn't the first that came out with the MP3 player. They were the ones that made it better, right? They kind of took something, you know, and kind of like, I think the mouse you just showed me, I'm surprised you still use a mouse. Like who are you? Like you still use a physical
dude,
mouse?
I
I gotta
love it.
make fun of you
I'm
for
on a
that.
desktop, but yeah.
But they made it out of like a soap thing, if from the story that I heard, which is kind of cool. So what is that the first level of the 15 that you're talking about, is kind of like,
No, it's not. I mean, it starts out with newbie mindset, right? So, whether you want to call it newbie mindset or beginner mindset, understanding that, let's say you, Jason, you're continually learning, you're getting better, and you have an open mindset. I think as you become more and more successful, as you gain levels, sometimes it's easy to get cocky and let your ego get in the way. And so, there's just those types of concepts. And again, if you compare it to a game, if you get a sword, for example, you keep using it, you're going to lose durability. Some you have to keep sharpening, right? So, on this bike, you just because you rode yesterday doesn't mean you have to ride again. Right? You have to keep training your mind, your physical body, all that stuff. And your life is like just going around collecting power ups to make you more efficient as a person. And it might be a very kind of neurotic way of looking at it, but at the end of the day, it's life is just a lot of if this then that statements. So we're in essence robots.
yeah, I see a lot of people trying to overcomplicate things, you know, like when I work with someone or when they come into the mastermind, they're trying to think like so far ahead. And I'm like, you sometimes just got to go back to the basics. You know, like I grew up playing tennis, and I played in college. I remember one time, and I tell this story, I think a couple times on the show, where I was getting crushed by this one kid that I was so much better. And my coach just yelled at me, go back to the basics, stupid. Right? Like I was trying to overthink this complicated thing of going, I was like, just hit the ball over the net. and wound up beating them. And I think we do a lot of that, in business. We just overcomplicate it. If we just went back to the basics, that's kind of why, with technology, and you see this all the time, it's great responsibility, and we have all this power, but you can really send people away if you don't just kind of go back. I think what Gary Vaynerchuk talks about, the Jetsons going back to the Flintstones, and then you can separate yourself from everybody else.
Totally. Yeah, that's well said.
What are some other levels in the book that you talk about?
Yeah, so I think it's one of them is about thinking long term. So I'm just looking at this Pokemon card. You just mentioned Gary Vee. So one of the guys that used to work for me is now on his brand team. He actually just sold me this Pokemon card over here. So it's like, okay, I'm looking at this piece of cardboard. I paid, it's not like there's like $75,000 Charizard cards. I paid like $2,000 for this one.
What?
And so
what? Wait.
here,
There's a $75,000 Pokemon card.
Yeah.
What?
So I'll tell you how this all relates, right? So, in business, I mean, you can definitely, take a look at trends, what's trending, but also thinking about the long term. So when I buy this thing, if I think about the markets a little bit, if I think about what's going on in the world, where should I be putting my money? Okay. I'm not trying to get a return on this immediately. I'm just going to store it, right? This think about art, think about collectibles. So I'm looking at trends, but also I'm thinking long term. Like I'm totally okay with losing money on this. So, what type of long-term decisions can you make, right? So for example, you mentioned profit a little earlier. Can I defer profits for as long as possible so I can build enterprise value in my company, right? And this applies directly to agencies as well. Can I think long-term where maybe I want to work with people. Can I build the right culture, right? Because a lot of agencies that you might talk to, maybe you don't want to work with these people because they're too short-term focused and there's a lot of ego and they just want to make money, right? That's not long-term thinking. So that applies directly into, life and then business in general. You want to work with long-term people and play long-term games with them. So
Love it. What else? I'm still blown away by, I look back at all the baseball cards I collected over the years. I mean, I have Hank Aaron, Mark McGuire, all these amazing
dude,
ones. I don't think they're
one
worth
just
anything
sold.
close to that.
One just sold. That's the record, 5.2 million bucks baseball card. I think a couple weeks ago. So
Babe Ruth?
I don't think it was a Babe Ruth. I think there's a Mike Trout card that sold for like over $1 million. I'll tell
Who's
you
Mike
that.
Trout?
You Angel Slugger. I
Oh,
don't know who he
okay.
plays for now, but
I've
yeah,
been out of the baseball card game since '91.
yeah. Well, but see, like now it's like, okay, maybe it makes sense to get back. The Rock has a U of Miami card. It's worth 45 grand right now. When he was playing in college, right? So
It's crazy. Well, I'm Florida State. I would burn it, even though I do like The Rock. I still like you, Dwayne, but I would burn anything with Miami on it.
yeah,
Um, yeah, I was listening to something with Gary Vaynerchuk, and he was talking about collecting business cards as baseball cards, of going, if you could get the original Steve Jobs business card or Jeff Bezos card, I was
yeah,
like, that would be interesting. Uh,
yes.
right. And thinking about that. Um, so we're totally off track. I just got so screwed up by the $75,000 Pokemon card, but that's my ADD. Let's get back into what are some other levels that you talk about in the book?
Yeah. So, one thing I want to touch upon is the concept of the wealth ladder. And this actually comes from the CEO of ConvertKit, Nathan Barry. And so, when you start out in life, you go to school and then you try to build great habits, right? Whether it's playing sports or games or whatever. And then it's like you go get a job. And then the next level after that is maybe you start freelancing on the side, right? Maybe you kind of hold the job to kind of keep you safe a little bit. And then it starts going well. Maybe you start the agency, right? Or you can start with drop shipping first. It's not the best e-commerce business model, but then it starts going well. You start to hold inventory. So there's, you're constantly leveling up in your career. And the next thing is maybe you have productized services for your agency. Who knows, right? Or maybe you go on a pay for performance model. You can do that too. It scales really well, right? Revenue per employee is super high. Then it's like, oh, you know what? I got all this extra cash now. Why don't I go build a network effects business, right? Or why don't I go build like a platform business? Or why don't I go build a SpaceX? Or why don't I just become an investor? And not all of these are mutually exclusive, but you can see there's levels to everything. And so that's what we were talking about earlier, but that's the concept of the wealth ladder. So I think those that are listening right now that maybe, might be starting out or maybe doing a couple $1,000,000 a year, just understanding that there's levels to everything. And, I think Jason and I can both attest to this stuff takes a lot of time. So that's another concept.
When do you know you've reached the top of uh, the level that you should be? Because I see sometimes people get to a certain level and then they
Yeah.
go, man, I liked it back in the day when, like, the typical situation with a lot of people.
Yeah.
Like, they're an accidental agency owner. They got kind of thrown into this because they knew how to do something well. They were like a freelancer, and then they were like, well, I don't want to do everything myself, so let me hire people. They hire people, and then they realize that the business is making more money, but they're making less.
Yeah.
And they're like, man, I just want to go back to where it was. And so some people go back to the freelancing, which is perfectly fine. It's just you've reached that level of where you want to be, or you should go find a different level. Or some people implement the right systems and then they can kind of break through and figure out what's the next step. So how do you know, like, if someone's listening, how do you know when you're at the right level, or should we move?
Totally. Yeah. So I think there's two things. There's contentment and then there's congruency. I think when you're waking up in the morning consistently, maybe 3 days in a row, and you're realizing that, holy crap, this agency behemoth that I built that's maybe doing 20 to 30 million bucks a year, and maybe I'm not making as much as before. Maybe this is a pain in the butt and this is not congruent, but you still keep finding yourself doing it consistently. So there's no congruency there, right? So asking yourself, okay, there's something off there, but then also asking yourself too, like, am I content? Forget about the future, forget about the past. Like, am I happy right now? Am I content with what I have right now? Right. So we're getting philosophical here. But ultimately that's what matters, right? In life, like, your operating system up here, if it's not content, then why are you doing what you're doing? So I think taking the time to reflect. What I used to just work the entire time, 7 days a week. Now I block out my Fridays. And that those Fridays are typically just reserved for thinking. I might have conversations with a couple of friends or whatever, but blocking out that time, like what should I start doing, stop doing, keep doing, what really pisses me off right now. And then just constantly like, kind of updating my operating system, my brain. That's at least what helps me. So
Very cool. Let's talk about what are some key strategies that every agency owner needs to know about.
I think still like we want to talk about mergers and acquisitions. I think an unfair advantage agency owners have. People are like, oh, SEO is dying, whatever. But like, okay, Google, YouTube, hello, like they're still one of the biggest companies in the world. As long as there's search, there will be SEO. And some of the smartest founders I know are really, really good at SEO because it's the compounding effect is so strong. So let's say you don't really understand SEO right now. That's fine. Can you go use a tool like Ubersuggest or Ahrefs, these SEO tools? Go find a website in your niche that's ranking for all the keywords you want. Go buy it, right? And then all of a sudden you have the advantage. You're going to collect all these leads. You can retarget all these people hitting your website, and you can buy these websites for I wouldn't say pennies on the dollar, maybe dimes on the dollar. But a lot of these websites are under monetized, right? So I just think it's people going back to long-term thinking again. If you start with SEO, it forces you into long-term thinking because all the short-term stuff I tried in the beginning, it gets torn up. But the long-term stuff, it just keeps compounding and it forces you to think like an investor. So how can you take the M&A mindset that maybe Jason's been talking about on this podcast or in his mastermind and then using it from a marketing perspective? That's one thing.
Yeah, I love that you brought that up because a mastermind member, we've been talking about that quite a bit, about buying certain assets that rank really well. And he's been crushing it, on it. So it's not necessarily just buying the whole company, it's buying, assets in order
Totally.
to fit into, those things that you're missing out on rather than just trying to build it up,
Yeah.
from scratch.
Well, by the way, like I think that's what you and I were kind of nerding out on before. It's now it's just buy versus build. And there's a book called Buy Then Build, right? And there's another one called Buying a Small Business. It's a lot more complicated than it seems. Not saying it's easy, but it's it's look, if I think if I can do it, at least I think anybody can do it. So
I agree with that. No, I'm just kidding.
but the other thing too, by the way, I don't know if you've been hanging out in Clubhouse. I've been spending quite a bit of time there, so I'm investing 20 hours of my time a week in it, but like I'm meeting like 2 or 3 amazing people every single day. So I just think the organic reach on that is super strong, and obviously with these social channels, the bigger they get, the less organic reach there is. So
Our on Clubhouse, I have been. I like it. My thing is I'm at a stage in my life right now where I don't I don't have 20 hours a week to invest, or I don't want to invest 20 hours a week in it. And you don't have to invest that much. But like Eric's saying is you can get, that much more back and so how are you utilizing it? Are you just utilizing it to build, relationships? That's what I've been seeing on Clubhouse. What are some
yeah.
strategies around that?
So, for those that haven't tried it, I mean, audio-based social network. So for me, it's networking at scale. It's building relationships at scale. Right now, we're not able to kind of, meet in person as of this recording. But that's what it is. And so you see a lot of these people, like let's use Grant Cardone or Ty Lopez, love them or hate them. They're spending a lot, probably more time than I am in these apps. Like there's one guy that I'm a friend with. He was part of this rap group called Pretty Ricky. He's on the app all the time, but it's some of these people I was just like acquaintances with in the past, but we've interacted quite a bit and we start interacting afterwards. So it's reinforcing or building new relationships. Like I never interacted with Grant Cardone before the app. Ty Lopez, same thing. Now I do, right? And then a lot of other influential people. But what I'll say is this too. What kind of came full circle for me was when I was about 24, 25 years old, I reached out to this guy, Dave Capern. He runs this agency called Likeable. And yesterday he was in room. And he introduced himself, and I chimed in. I said, hey, like, you actually got on the phone with me when I was 25 for 30 minutes, and you talked about this organization, entrepreneurs organization. And I owe that all to you because you brought it up. And, thank you for that, right? And then all of a sudden he's like, oh, by the way, like with your upcoming book, I have 700,000 followers on LinkedIn. Let's do a live, okay? And let's also get you an article on Inc. as well. but that just came from me like talking about him for like 15 seconds. So it's a lot of serendipity, and it's a lot of relationships at scale. You get what you put in.
Totally agree. Yeah, I mean, I love obviously the audio, and I love
Yeah.
that it's not recorded and you have
Yeah.
to attend live.
Yeah.
What I find working really well on Clubhouse is getting in a room with a bunch of people. I mean, it's kind of low, right? If it's just two people talking,
Yeah. It's not
you
good.
might as well listen to a podcast. I
Yeah.
mean, if you can get a ton of people and they're just having a conversation, it's kind of like, it amplifies it where, it's like you're listening into someone's dinner conversation around something you're really interested in, whether it be growing an agency or whatever it is. So that's
Some of these conversations, like, legit people would be paying 10 to 20 $30,000 for a mastermind to learn. And I hate using that word because it's, it's become kind of this, not saying yours is, but it's dirty in a lot of different ways. But it's, so let's say peer group, right? But being able to listen to this advice, and some of the stuff I listen to, I'm like, oh crap, I'm gonna try it. So I have gotten some really good stuff on, by the way, like the peer group that I do with Neil, my podcast co-host. We had a live event, and through through Clubhouse, I learned about this thing called the shuttered venue type of grant, coming out as part of the coronavirus relief. I didn't know about that, but some guy talked about it. He's like, yeah, you can get this. And like, yeah, we had to shutter our event last year. It's going to come back, but that's what it is. So just little micro moments like that.
very cool. Awesome. Well, where can people go and get the book?
Yeah, well, here, I'll pull it up again. This is what it looks like, guys. So you can go to levelingup.com, or you can just go to your favorite online retailer, just Leveling Up Eric Siu, and you'll find it. And yeah, that's basically it.
Awesome. Well, everyone go check out the book. Eric's a really cool guy. And if you guys enjoyed this episode and you guys want to be surrounded by amazing agency owners on a consistent basis where we have a ton of fun, we're able to see the shit that you're not able to see right in front of you. And a lot of times we'll talk about strategies that we don't talk about anywhere else. And it's pretty amazing. So if you want to scale your agency faster, be surrounded by amazing people and have a lot of fun doing it, make sure you guys go to digitalagencyelite.com. And until next time, have a swank day.